Okay, welcome to my video on how to draw a slingshot in Onshape. I originally made this for one specific friend and decided to redo it for a general audience if it's going to be useful to get people started in the sketching environment. So let's sign into my account. And we're now faced with the recently opened documents. So this is my documents and anyone else's documents I may have looked at. You can select just my documents here, which sometimes is also things that are shared with me. So one's just created by me. If friends are sending you documents. Now one of the charms of Onshape is that other people can share what they're doing with you without having to swap disks or thumb drives or anything. And so you can just look at documents that are shared with me. But anyway, let's go to my documents and let's create a new document for today's project. So we're going to click Create and go to Document. And we're going to one-hand type because I'm holding a microphone. Slingshot. Okay. So it'll take a second to load a workspace here. Onshape is web-based, so once in a while you're vulnerable to server connection issues, but mostly it's really quick. Even when you're using the mobile version, I have an iPad I use with cellular data, and it's awfully quick for the most part. So you open a new document, and you are faced with this blank 3D space. Now the first thing let's talk about is how to manipulate the space. If you hold the right mouse button down, you can roll it around. And this takes a little bit of practice to learn how to get yourself oriented, so don't get frustrated at first. It just takes a minute. You can zoom in with the wheel button and zoom back out, and if you click the wheel button, you can pan around. Okay. Let's see. Down here you can see your sub-documents. So Part Studio is where you can build sketches, parts, anything you want. You can have separate part studios, which each have completely different sketches and parts. And those can come down here. Now if you want to make a new one, you can click the plus button and you can create part studios. Assemblies are when you have finished parts you want to have interact with one another. So that's down the road in terms of 3D design. Drawings or technical drawings, if you want to show people what your project looks like, that's also not related to what we're doing today. So if you want to create something, a new slingshot, you would create a new part studio and then you'd build sketches within there. So, but for today we have this one, which is our default. We actually don't need this assembly at all, so you can go ahead and right click and delete that. We won't use that for now. So here are within our first part studio. Let's rename it right off the bat. That's a good practice to name things as you go, because you can get confused pretty quick otherwise. Slingshot, call it Slingshot 1. Okay. So now we want to start a sketch. Because we're in a 3D space, we have to decide where we want the sketch to be. There's two ways to create a sketch. One, you can select the plane where you want to make the sketch first. And notice how when I hover over this plane, it turns orange. We're going to talk about this a lot in Onshape, how when you hover over things, it wakes them up. In this case, when it wakes it up, it means that when you right-click, now you have options pertinent to that thing that you just woke up. And for here, we have a lot of options, but the one we're interested in is a new sketch. So that's one way to start a new sketch. Another way would be to click the sketch button up here, and then see how it turns red? Anytime you have a new feature here and it turns red, that means something is broken, something needs attention. If you hover over the red words, it'll tell you what it needs. Sketch did not regenerate properly because you need to select a sketch plane. So, like I said before, because we're in 3D space and we want to make a 2D drawing, we have to tell it where in that space we want the drawing to be. And to do that, we select a sketch plane. So from here, you can right-click and drag around and pick any plane you want. Say you want the slingshot, if you're making a 3D part, you want it to be kind of flat on the table, you could use the top plane. But for today, we'll just go ahead and use the front plane. So left-click that. And now we have a sketch in the front plane. But we have it all kind of goofy here because it's out of plane, and that's not going to be very useful for doing a sketch. So the first thing we want to do, let's click the wheel button and drag it over a little bit. We're going to right-click and view normal to sketch plane. See how I did that? Right-click anywhere in space, view normal to sketch plane, and that will flatten it out for you. So now you're truly in a 2D environment. Another way you can do that, if you right-click and get off, and now I end up getting off all the time. That's just inherent to a 3D modeling program. You can hit the N button, N as in Nancy on your keyboard, and that will do the same thing. And then if none of that is appealing, you can use this little orientation cube and click front, and it will straighten it out for you. Or if you're on the right plane, you can click left, and it'll straighten it out for you that way. This is just to help you keep oriented in space. But the standard way to do it is to, if you get off, to right-click and view normal to sketch plane or hit the N button. Okay, so we're within a sketch now, and this is important to realize that you're not always inside your sketch, but you are right now. See this little window that says Sketch 1? Let's rename it, by the way. We'll call this the Haze sketch. I'll show you why in just a second. If you click OK, your sketch will go away and you're no longer in the sketch. Now you're just back in the general 3D environment. So if you go trying to draw things now, you'll be frustrated. So you always want to double click your sketch and be in the sketch. Now you can move this window around if you don't like where it is, but it will default to right there, and it's usually okay to just sit there. So now we are in a sketch and we're ready to start doing sketch stuff. So because today we're going to draw over a slingshot, the first thing we're going to learn how to do is import a drawing and scale to that drawing. So if you look up here, there's a little page with an arrow that says Insert DXF or DWG. If you hover over things, it will give you extended instructions on them if you wait long enough. So that's a nice little built-in learning tool. So Insert DXF or DWG. Now those are CAD files. So someone sends you a CAD file they drew, you can import it and you can use that to build off your own files. So that's not what we need right now. We're going to click the little right arrow here and find a second option. Notice that a lot of these tools have the little right arrow. So you have options within options, so be aware of that. So we're going to right click this and go to Insert Image. Now you'd have to read this yourself to get the full details there, but the gist of it is that now you can insert an image, but we don't have an image in our Onshape world yet. So the first thing we're going to do is go back here, go back to Onshape, and we're going to create, if you want to import a drawing, this is how you do it. I'm going to show you how to do this. Create an import file. Okay. Now I have a Pocket Predator slingshot photo on my desktop, and so I'm going to pull that in and import it. Don't worry about private and public unless you start paying for your subscription. Okay, now you can see I've done this a couple of times already, but we've now got this in my documents. We have this image, but don't go trying to click on it. I'll tell you how to use it here. So we're going to go into Slingshot, which is the document we're just working on. So remember this, you need to go back into the document in order to import this photo. And in fact, we need to go back into the sketch as well. So this is a little draggy today. It must be my internet connection. Sorry about that. So here we are. Now we've got nothing, but we want to go back into the sketch. Double click the sketch. And then see how it doesn't automatically default you to view normal to sketch plane? So you're going to get used to doing this often. Right click, view normal to sketch plane. I think there's a reason why it's in the right click menu. Okay, so now we want to bring that image in. So let's go to the insert image here. And let's find it. So other documents. It's not in the current document. It's in other documents because it's kind of its own document. So let's go to My Documents, and there is the image. So click on it and click on it again. It says Draw an Image Rectangle. Now it doesn't matter how big you make this at first. So just draw any old rectangle you like. We're going to show you how to scale it in just a second. So what I will do is, since we're going to draw this left slingshot, see the origin here? See how it lights up when I hover over it? That means that it's an entity you can interact with. And what it means is that it's the very center of our 3D universe here. If you don't like seeing it, by the way, you can come up here and click the little eyeball and make it go away. But it's pretty handy, so we're going to use it today. Again, view normal to sketch plane or the letter N. Okay, so I'm going to get this. I've got this pretty well centered. You can just move it around until you get it where you like it, but I'm going to eyeball center it. It's not a perfectly symmetric photo, so it doesn't need to be perfectly symmetric, but we're going to get close enough. Okay, so the first thing we need to do if we're going to really use this to make a CAD file that we can use for WaterJet or CNC is make sure that the size is correct. So in order to do that, you need to know the size of something on the slingshot. It can be anything. Say you know the size of the lanyard hole that Bill uses. I don't know that, but I'm pretty sure these are 1-inch fork tips. So I'm going to zoom in with my wheel button here. I'm going to click the wheel button and drag it over so I can focus on this spot. And then we're going to do a couple things in a row. So the overall theme here is that the first time, now I'll explain what this means in a minute, but the first time you dimension something in a sketch, so within one given sketch like this, the first thing you dimension is going to scale the entire sketch. Very important to remember this. So in this case, we're going to start learning how to use a corner rectangle. Corner rectangle. Now notice a little arrow here. There are different kinds of rectangles you can make. We'll talk about those later, but basically it tells you what it is. You can hover over it and it'll explain to you how to use each tool. So we're going to use corner rectangle right now. So you can click and release or click and hold. It doesn't matter. We'll click and release in this case. Choose one corner, and then let's come down and choose our second corner. Now the side to side is the dimension we're going to use to scale this whole thing. So that's an important thing. Let's get that just about right, keeping in mind that's a somewhat skewed photo. So we'll go there. Now I'm going to pay attention to this because this can get confusing. It's offering to let you decide how big you want each side of the rectangle to be. Don't do that right now. Just hit the escape key or click off of the rectangle button, okay? Because this is asking you to add dimensions to a sketch, and as we just discussed, the first dimension controls the sketch, and this will throw that off. So just click off of the rectangle button or hit the escape key. I actually tag side mouse buttons on my mouse to the escape key and the space bar because you use them so much in Onshape, but we'll just use keys for today. So, okay. You got this rectangle. The rectangle describes the width of the fork, which you know to be a measurement you know in the real world. It should be 1 inch. Even I don't know that it is for sure on this slingshot. I'm just guessing. If I'm wrong, then that's okay. You can figure out what dimension you want to use. So let's talk about the dimension tool. See this little? It's a measurement between two lines, and you can also get to it with the letter D. You can hit the letter D on the keyboard, and that'll bring it up. And you can click. See how when I hover over the line lights up? It says, is this the line you'd like to interact with? And I say yes. So I left click, and I'm going to pull this dimension up to about here. And now, see the white box with highlighted text in it is asking you if you'd like to select a dimension for this side of the rectangle. Now again, I don't want you to get confused on this, but it's a very important detail. The first dimension in a sketch will scale the entire sketch. So since this is the first thing I'm actually adding a dimension to, the whole sketch will change size when I set this dimension, okay? So we're in inches, so I'm just going to type in 1 inch. You don't have to specify the units unless you're using a different unit. So if I can actually type in millimeters and it'll convert it to inches, but if you're using inches, you can just hit the number 1. So let's hit enter and see how the entire sketch changed size. So now you've got a drawing which is scaled such that this width is 1 inch. So now when you draw the slingshot, you know you're going to be pretty close, even though this drawing isn't quite perfect. When you do import CAD files like a DXF, that's when you can get exact dimensions. So, okay. So we don't actually need this rectangle, so let's click this again or hit the escape key to get out of that tool. Anytime you want to select something, you want to make sure that you're out of the tool, or else you'll just keep using that tool. That can be a source of frustration. You know what, we don't even have to delete that rectangle, but I'm going to take this drawing and pull it over so it's about centered on the origin, right about there, and we're just going to do that for convenience sake to help us drawing the slingshot. So, okay, so now we've got this image in the back. Now you don't want to start drawing over the top of this because this is an entity and it can move around and you can size it and delete it and you can interact with it in ways you don't necessarily want to. So let's close the sketch. Don't exit because it'll delete it. Accept it with the green check mark. All right, so now it's time to make another sketch. And the way we're going to do that is by the same way we did before. You can click sketch and you can select the front plane. See how it lit up? Other things can light up. In fact, I could even choose this rectangle as my plane for the sketch, but let's not get confusing. Let's click the front plane. And now we've got another sketch. Notice how both sketches are in the exact same space. You can put as many sketches you want on any given plane because they don't take up any space. So I could literally put as many sketches as the software will allow in the same space. So they're overlapping, but they are not interacting. Now that I'm in this sketch, which is separate from the haze sketch, I can't actually pull any of these things around. You can use them. If I want to use this line in my current sketch, I can actually pull it into my sketch, but it won't do that automatically. So the point is that you're safe from moving anything in that sketch. Okay, so we're in our new sketch, sketch 1, which we'll call Slingshot sketch 2 or whatever. And don't fall into the trap of wanting to accept that because you'll close the sketch and now you're no longer in the sketch. So double click it so it's active. Okay, so let's view normal to sketch plane so that we're nice and flat, or hit the letter N. You know, this box is kind of annoying me, so let's go in and delete that. I'll show you how to do this, but for now I'm just going to knock it out of there. Okay, so here we are in our second sketch, and we're ready to start drawing this slingshot, which is scaled to about the right size. So the very first thing you want to do is figure out what symmetry your design has and draw a center line that will allow you to just draw one side of it and mirror across. Or if you have something with 4-fold symmetry or 10-fold symmetry, figure out your symmetry so you can just draw one piece of it, and then you can mirror and pattern that around so you don't have to duplicate any of your efforts. So, drawing a center line. So in this case, any center line will work, any size center line will work to mirror stuff. But because we're going to use the center line to help draw elements, we want it to go from top to bottom. So we're going to click the line tool up here. Click it. This also has a key command. You can hit the letter L if you want to pull up L. Line is actually something else I hook to my mouse, but I don't have it on this mouse. So, okay. So when you want to draw any element in Onshape, you always want to make sure that you're connecting it from one spot to another spot. You always want to make sure that you're defining whatever you're drawing as much as possible. You never want to just freeform. You never ever eyeball, except in certain cases. But whenever when you have specific places you want lines or curves to start and end on, you never eyeball them. You always use these highlighting tools. So notice how when I hover over this, two things can happen. One, the origin lights up, and two, the origin gets a little square around it. So if I just want to draw a line relative to this origin and it's lit up, see what's happening? See this little orange line coming out, a dotted orange line, and a little horizontal line next to my cursor. What this means is that Onshape is saying, hey, it looks like you'd like to draw a perfectly horizontal line. Let me help you do that. It looks like you'd like to draw a perfectly horizontal line that's actually relative to this origin. So right now, with all these things lit up, we're going to help you draw a line that is perfectly horizontal and perfectly at the level of the origin. Now you can see how helpful this is going to be in just a second. It'll work vertical too. But when you get close enough that the box shows up, that means that you're interacting with the origin itself. So if you want to draw a line that begins at the origin and goes upward, you want to make sure that this little box is highlighted around it so that you know that you're actually clicking on the origin. And at this point, there's no eyeballing required because you know for certain that that's going to click on the origin and attach to that origin. But that's because the little box is there. So the box is very important to give you the confidence to know that you're going to have a mathematically perfect line starting at that spot and no gaps in your drawing down the road. So one way we can do this is to start here. A note about drawing lines. If you click once and release, it will assume that you want to draw a chain of lines. So let me show you that real quick. If you click once and release, and then click again, it will immediately give you a next line. And if you click again, it'll give you a next line after that, until you double click to end the chain of lines. Okay, so sometimes that's useful, but a lot of times you just want to draw one line at a time. So I'm going to hit the escape key so that I can highlight these and delete them, hit the delete key. The other way you can do it is hold the left mouse key down, and that will let you, click the line tool again, and that will just let you draw one line at a time. So I'm going to come in here and hover over the origin, see the little box to make sure that I'm connected to the origin. Zoom out a little bit. And I'm going to hold down the left mouse key, and I'm going to pull upward. And I've got this line, and when I let go of the left mouse button, it will give me one line and end that line and not let me draw another one. So let's see what happens as I drag this around. It's telling me the length of my line, that little number there. So I know that that's 3 inches, roughly. And it's also, as I go around, it's going to guess at constraint. See how it snapped it into that vertical constraint? And see how the little constraint icon showed up next to my cursor? So it says that as long as you're about there, it's going to guess that you want a perfectly vertical line. And it helps you out because now if you wander around a little bit in here, it's all going to be a perfectly vertical line. Same thing will happen on the horizontal. It's going to help you out a little bit to draw that perfectly. Now if you don't want that, you can hold down the shift key, and then it will stop trying to guess differences. Like if you want to eyeball close but not perfectly in a vertical line, a little bit off, and it's messing with you by forcing you into a vertical constraint, hold down the shift key and it'll take that away. But in our case, we actually want to draw a perfectly vertical line. So if I let go, now I've got a perfectly vertical line. By the way, it brings up this little box, and if I want it to be a 3-inch line, I can hit the number 3, and it will draw me a line that goes from this origin up to here, and will be 3 inches long. So that's one way to draw a line. Let's hit the escape key so I can interact with this line. I'm actually going to delete it and show you another way to do this. This is a little bit getting ahead of ourselves, but I think it will be useful. So let's click the line tool again. Remember how if without the little box showing up, it's just letting me draw a line relative to this origin. So what I really want is a line that goes from here to here. And now I can draw two lines, one that goes up and one that goes down, and there's nothing wrong with that, except that now you have two separate lines, and if you go to move one, you have to move them together, and it's just a little extra work. So what I'm going to do instead here is I'm going to hover over say I come up here. Actually, it's guessing pretty good that I want to relate to this origin no matter what. But the standard way to do it is to hover over the origin and say, hey, I'm going to draw a line. I'd like it to be relative to this origin. Are we on the same page? And Onshape says, yes, we're on the same page. Look at that. I know that you're thinking about drawing a line relative to this origin. I haven't clicked anything yet. Okay, we're just hovering. So I'm going to come up here, and it says, hey, if you'd like to draw a line that is perfectly vertical to this origin, go ahead. I've got you. I'm like, okay. So I'm going to hold down the left mouse button because I just want one line. And now I'm going to drag down. And I've wandered off, but I still know that I started my line perfectly vertical. And see how the little orange dotted line comes back in? Okay. So I've dragged down. Now I could stop at the origin, and I know that I'm exactly on the origin because of that little box. Or I could keep going. I'm going to keep going in this case. Now I can draw whatever line I want, but if I get close enough that Onshape's like, oh hey, yeah, you wanted that to be perfectly vertical relative to where you started, and which is relative to the origin. Now you see the little orange dots. I know that that's what's going on, and I can see the little, next to the C in Text Classic, I can see the vertical constraint. Now as long as I don't move my mouse and break any of these things, if I let go, I now have one line, perfectly vertical, oriented through the origin. Okay, so there's a lot of things going on in there, but it's all very powerful stuff in terms of learning how to sketch well. Now when it gives you this option, you don't have to answer this question. In this case, we don't care how long this line is. So all I'm going to do is hit the escape key or click out of the line tool and not define the length of that. Okay? Okay. So we've got our image in the background, we've got it scaled to the appropriate size, and we've got our new sketch on top that we're going to use to trace around this photo. We've got our center line. It's time to start actually drawing the slingshot. So how do you draw a complex curve like this? Because unless you're a great mathematician, and even then because Bill Hayes did this by hand, I don't think there's one equation that'll tell you the outline of this line that would be anything we could ever really get our heads around. So we've got a complex curve, in other words. And how do you draw complex curves? Well, there's two ways you can do it. The way that I don't like is to use a spline. Here's the spline tool up here. And if you hover over it, it'll tell you that spline is a difficult tool to use in this context because I'll show you why. But we can do it. And if you're in a hurry, sometimes I'll draw a spline. And here's how we're going to do it. So we're going to start the spline off the midpoint. All right? And if I hover over the line, now I'm within a tool, right? So when I'm hovering over this line within the context of the tool, it's going to give me options that are in the context of having this spline tool started. And in this case, it's that little icon you see next to my cursor, which is the coincident constraint icon. See, it's a little line locked onto another line. So it's saying, hey, it looks like you're hovering over this line. Would you like to start your spline actually attached to that line, mathematically perfectly attached to the line, no eyeballing? And you can say, sure. Or if you want to hold down the shift key and just start the spline wherever you want, near the line, you can do that too. But for us, we're almost always going to want to start using these constraints. So let's start. Let's click there. And with a spline, you just click points along your surface. Oh, by the way, in the middle of a spline, I can click my mouse wheel button and pan around, and I can zoom. And it's not going to interact with the spline that I'm drawing, right? So you can navigate around without messing up your spline. So, okay. Click, click. Now you can do this with as many or as few points as you want. More points will give more detail, but also give more opportunity to make it complicated. So one thing to notice is you're coming along. Onshape is always trying to guess inferences. And sometimes you don't actually want inferences. Because if you draw this dot attached to the center line, and if you try to move the spline later, it's going to say, oh, hey, we're happy to move the spline for you, but you wanted this point to be horizontal to the origin. So we're going to preserve that as we go. You don't necessarily want that. So be aware, the inference guessing is great, but it has to be managed. So you got to be careful not to get inferences you don't actually want. So we're going to skip right over that line here to make sure that there's no inferences lighting up as I put my next point on the curve here. So, okay, here we go, and let's come up to about, we'll come up to about here. Okay, and we're going to double click to close the spline. So now we've got this one big beautiful curve that perfectly follows the contour of our design. Now you can do this, but they're very hard to interact with because there's so many different lines, and every line is based on lines around it to get the shape, and each little line has its own radius, and it's actually a very complex line, which makes it difficult to control. And control is important for us because we want to be able to shape things, we want to make sure things are perpendicular to other lines. There's probably a whole art to splines that I just haven't really gotten into, but in general I find them to be cumbersome and choose not to use them. So we're still in the spline tool, so if you click anything right now you're going to start drawing another spline. So click out of the spline tool and let's delete this spline. Click and hit the delete button. So the way I prefer to draw slingshots is to see a series of circles and curves. So if we look at this, we can see a circle here. We can see a circle here, part of a circle anyway, and we can probably see a circle in here and maybe one here. So let's start drawing circles to match the contour of this slingshot. Okay, so the first circle we're going to draw is the base of the slingshot here. So the circle tool, again, has a little arrow next to it. There are different kinds of circles you can draw. Center point circle, 3-point circle, and not a circle at all, but an ellipse, close enough. For copying over designs, a 3-point circle is really handy, and let's talk about how to use that. So when you see something like, obviously it turns into not a circle, but there's a part here that's fairly circular. So let's draw a circle that more or less matches that. We're going to click 3 points along the perimeter of what we perceive to be a circle. Again, don't click on that right now, because you do not want one of these points attached to that line. Click next to it, and then we're going to do another one that makes the circle look about right. Now notice that this circle is not centered in our drawing here. Here's the center of the circle, it's not on the line. So this is not a circle that as we draw half of the slingshot we're going to be able to mirror over well without having a sharp edge here, because it's not going to be a real circle. So the first thing we should probably do is accept that this photo isn't symmetric and try to make up our own grip base that will be symmetric. So again, right now I'm in the circle tool, so don't start trying to move things around. Hit the escape key. And then let's grab the center line of this, the center dot I mean, and right now we can move it wherever we want. It looks like it's attached to that one point. So sometimes trying to understand how Onshape thinks is confusing. I made 3 points to define this circle, and it's choosing that one point as the anchor point for the circle. I guess that's because it's the point that determines the size of the circle. So anyway, trying to understand how Onshape thinks. But for our purposes, so right now it's letting me put this wherever. But if you hover over the line, it's going to say, oh, would you like the center of the circle to be on the line? Cool, we can do that. And we do want that. So what we're going to do is make up a circle whose size is about right for the base of the slingshot we're going to draw. So we don't want to go too big, we don't want to go too small, because that's obviously smaller than the base of the grip. So, you know, the problem here is that it's not going to be quite right, but it'll be close enough. So let's do something that kind of splits the difference. And it's right about there. Since we're not necessarily drawing this slingshot, we're just drawing a slingshot. So let's stop there. Now, I now have, actually I now have two different sketch entities because there's a line going through it now. So if I wanted to turn one of these into a 3D part, these are represented separately now. That's just something to note as we go along. Something else to note is because you made a 3-point circle, these 3 points still exist. They're still sitting there. And each of these points has a relationship with the rest of the circle. We're going to talk about that more later, but just note right now that when you hover over an entity, all these little icons show up that refer to constraints with other things in your geometry. So I know that's confusing, but we'll come back to it. Anyway, right now we've got our first circle here. Let's try drawing another 3-point circle. Is that 3-point circle? It is. Let's draw one right about here. And that looks about right. And then maybe we can draw one that goes like that. And that's going to be pretty close too. We're going to have to bring those in a little bit. Okay, so now we've got 3 circles that describe most of the outer contour of the side of this slingshot. So we could draw another one here, but I think we'll get away with just a curve instead. So one thing you may want to do for our purposes right now is get rid of these points. So click out of the 3-point circle. So when you want to click multiple things in Onshape, you don't have to hold down any keys. You can just go through and keep clicking, and they will all highlight. Okay? Now keep in mind that circles and points are separate sketch entities, and so they can be highlighted separately. If you want to unselect everything, hit the space bar. Okay? So because these 3 points are going to cause us trouble, let's click 1, 2, 3, and hit the delete key, and just make these normal circles right now that are not attached to these points, because that's going to cause us trouble. So let's get those out of here. We'll do the same thing down here. Okay. So now when you change the shape of these circles, it won't be trying to change them in relationship to those points, because that's going to be troublesome. So, okay, but let's talk about constraints. At this point, what we want is we want these 2 circles to touch, but we don't want to eyeball it, because if we eyeball it, we're not going to get it right. There's going to be some overlap, and we're going to end up with sharp edges, and stepping motors don't like sharp turns. Stepping motors like smooth curves. So how do you make these 2 circles touch each other in a way that it's a perfect transition curve and there's no sharp edge? Well, you do that by telling it what you want mathematically, which is for them to be tangent to one another. So luckily for us, we have one of our constraints up here is tangency. And so we can select 2 entities and say we want them to be tangent, and Onshape will just make it happen. Now, how Onshape makes it happen is something that you need to really think about. Because if you say, I want these to be tangent, it says, well, I don't know that you're trying to draw a slingshot, so I'm just going to move them both, or move whichever one I feel like moving to make them tangent. Let's try that. Watch the circles very carefully. Okay, so it moved our bigger one to the smaller one. Now we don't really want that because we liked where the bigger one was. So let's click back, undo. Now a note about undo. Undo works as long as you're within the sketch. You can undo all the way back to what you did at the beginning of the time you opened the sketch. But if we should save the sketch, all that undo stuff goes away. All your steps are no longer saved. So every time you go to accept a sketch, be real sure that you've got everything you want. But anyway, we just undid this, and so these are back where we want them. So when we want Onshape to move one entity instead of the other, we need to fix one of them. We need to tell it which one we want to have not change. And one of the constraints up here, constraints are your friend, by the way. You want to get really comfortable with these, even though they look dizzying at first. So one of the constraints we have is the fix constraint. That'll just keep it from moving at all. All these other things constrain it so it's parallel, or it's tangent, or it's vertical, or perpendicular, or whatever. This one says that it just can't move at all. And that's what we want in this case. So we're going to click this circle and click the fix constraint and see how it turns black. When things are blue, it means that there's some degree of freedom that can still be changed. So this circle's blue, so I can just change its size at a whim. But this one's black, which means that I can't move it at all. It won't move, it won't resize, I won't translate it, it won't nothing. It's fixed, it can't change. So that's good for us. So now we've got this circle we don't want to change, and this circle that we can probably change a little bit. Now one thing you may want to do is eyeball as much as possible so that you're controlling how this circle changes instead of letting Onshape decide. Because Onshape's just going to enlarge this to about there. And that's not quite what we want, is it? Maybe we want to bring this over here. Maybe a little bit further. Right about there. Okay. So now I'm pretty close to what I want. So when it changes this circle a little bit to make it tangent, I'm going to be okay with whatever it does. So when you want to make a constraint between 2 entities, you click both entities. I didn't take my first click on the circles. So now they're both orange, so you know they're both highlighted. And if you're confused about what's highlighted and what's not, again, just hit the space bar and start over. You don't want to highlight 2 things that you don't want to have highlighted. So if you notice, you zoom in, these are not attached right now. So let's fix that. Let's click this and click tangent. Now the letter T also brings up the tangent command. So if you use it a lot, you can just hit the T on the keyboard. So let's watch the circles. Click it. And all it did is scooch this over a little bit, because it tends to respect sizes. It says, you know, the guy probably chose the size of the circle. Let's just move the circle size he chose. Let's scooch it over a little bit and make these tangent. So now one thing to notice is graphics cards don't always necessarily keep up to date with the mathematical constraints between these items. So even though it looks like there's a gap there, there's not. And don't get faked out by that, because a lot of times you'll go and you say, this doesn't look right. You've got to always check your constraints. If the constraints are right, then the math is right, and don't worry about what's showing up on the screen all the time. So let's talk about that. How do I know if these 2 things are tangent now? Well, see all these little things popping up? We're going to learn how to use those. if you hover, don't click, but just hover over a circle. See that little constraint icon popped up? That means that this circle has one constraint. You want to know what that constraint is related to. You can see what it is based on the icon. It's a tangent constraint. But what's it tangent to? Well, hover over that, and it lights up the thing that it's constrained to. See that? Okay, let's try it again with another entity. Let's hover, don't click, hover over this. We have two constraints for this circle. One is fix, and that's just related to itself, and the other is tangent, which is related to that circle. Let's try this a few more times. Let's hover over this circle. Circle isn't showing me any constraints, but I bet the point will. Yep. So the point is being treated as a different entity from the circle itself, and that's okay. So we hover over that. It has a coincident constraint. Well, let's see what it's coincident to. Now we know it's the line, but let's just double check. So we hover, a lot of things light up. You hover, okay, one more time. Hover over the point, hover over the constraint icon, and it's lighting up that orange line. That means that it's coincident with that line. So now you know what it's attached to. So this is a super useful tool down the road. So let's hover over the line. The line has two constraints. It has a vertical constraint, which means that it's perfectly vertical, which we know because we drew it. And it has a coincident constraint, meaning that it's constrained to the center of that circle. Okay. I know it sounds like just a bunch of details, but this is super powerful stuff to know down the road. So, okay. So where are we? We've got this curve, which is, close enough. We've got this curve, which we like, and we've got this curve, which we've sort of scooched over to accommodate the asymmetric photo. So now we need to connect this and this. And we could draw another circle, but let's try a new tool called the curve tool, or the arc tool. Now again, there's a bunch of different kinds of arcs. I actually haven't gotten very comfortable with these other ones yet. They're very powerful for certain kinds of sketching. But you can use the 3-point arc for a lot of things. So let's use a 3-point arc. That's the default option. Now, when you're drawing a curve, 3 points are the beginning of the curve, the end of the curve, and then the middle, which defines the radius of the curve. So let me show you what that means. Let's actually just show you what that means out here. So 1, 2, and then you decide the radius of the curve like that. One other thing to notice is that if you haven't finished an entity like this, and you don't want it, hit the escape key. And you haven't told it what you wanted yet, so you haven't finished a line or a curve, so there's nothing that really exists yet, so it'll just go away. Okay, so let's try drawing a curve from about here. Now I'm eyeballing this, but we're going to fix that in a minute. From about here to about there with a curve that's about like that. All right. Notice how this turned gray. Let me just show you that again. This is an open space now, but when I close it, it turns gray. And it's a very important piece of information because it means that it's a fully enclosed, like truly geometrically enclosed space. There's no gaps. If you see a space that you think is enclosed, but it's not gray, then something's broken. Let's do a real quick example of that on the side here. Say we have a rectangle, and Onshape's going to draw the rectangle for us, and it turns gray. But let's say we decide to draw our own rectangle for whatever reason. So I'm going to draw 4 sides of a rectangle with lines, and I'm going to do it by just clicking and releasing, so it lets me draw a chain of lines. So here we go. Let's draw a vertical line. Now again, it's going to guess the vertical constraint. See that? And we're going to go with it. One click. Let's go horizontal. It's going to assume a horizontal constraint. We're going to go with that. Now, this is an interesting way to use these inferenced constraints. So as I'm coming up, Onshape's going, now you're connecting this from the last line, and you're going vertical, and that was horizontal. I'm going to guess that you want it to be perpendicular, which is fine by me, because that is what I want in this case. But then how are we going to get it so that it's exactly the same height as that dot over there? Are we just going to eyeball it and then draw another line over? That's one way you could do it. You could just draw a line to here and then draw another horizontal line from this dot over. But Onshape will help you out with this. So if you come over here and just hover, so nothing's happening yet, but if you hover over this point, it goes, oh hey, you want to draw this line relative to that point. And it's going to help you out. It's going to give you this horizontal orange dotted line. So right now, we've got a line that is, see the little constraint, and you got the orange. That means that we are horizontal relative to that dot. So let's come on over here. But how are you going to keep this vertical now? Well, it's guessing your vertical constraint, but now you lost the other constraint. Well, guess what? It knows that you want both. Now that you've awakened this inference, it's going to know that for the time you're trying to draw this line. It'll let you do both things. So now you've got a line that's perfectly vertical, perfectly horizontal from that dot. We are in business. So one more click. So now here's where we're going to purposefully break it. Say I'm coming over here. Now I'm zooming in as I'm drawing, and then I'm panning as I'm drawing, because I can do that without messing up the line. Say coming real close, but for whatever reason, maybe I'm holding the shift key, maybe I just decided to eyeball it. I didn't get close enough to light up that inference. Now I'm going to show you, if you do get close enough, boom. See the rectangle around the dot? That means that you're about to connect this to the dot. Whereas if the dot itself is lit up, but there's no square around it, you're not going to attach to the dot, the point. So in this case, it's letting me draw a line vertical to the dot. But unless you're actually, the little box is there, you're not going to attach. So say we screwed up, and we go to here, and we double click, and we end the rectangle there. Now if you zoom out, that looks like a rectangle, right? From this point on the screen, maybe that looks a little thick, but it's not something you necessarily notice. You're like, what's going on? Why is this rectangle broken? Well, it's not gray, so you know that it's broken. And now we know why it got broken. But if you don't know, it's easy to, in the middle of a sketch, end up with something like this. You're like, what is wrong with my geometry? Where did I leave a gap? And so you have to go find and fix that. And the best way to fix it is to avoid having that happen by making sure that the starts and ends of all your lines are firmly attached to points with that little box. But in this case, let's go in and fix this real quick. And I'm going to show you one more tool that can be handy in situations like this. It is called the Extend tool, and it's under the Trim tool. So Trim is very useful too. We'll get to that. But let's click this and go to Extend. And if you want to read all about it, you can. So the Extend tool works like this. You have the line you want to extend, so you're going to select that. It turns yellow, which means now you're in the middle of a task that requires the Extend tool. What you're going to do now is select the point you want to extend to. Now see how the little box lit up? That means that we're actually on that point. Click that, and it will turn this line into a longer line that attaches to that point. Notice that I don't have two lines here. It didn't create a new line to go to that point. It actually changed this line to be the correct length that I wanted to attach to that point. Okay? So Extend is a very powerful tool, and that's how you use it. So let's click off of Extend and go back to our drawing here. So where are we now? We have two circles with a curve connecting them, and for artistic purposes, you can get closer or further away from the drawing, but we're just going to, say this is good enough for now. So we got a curve, but the problem is, if you come in close, again, this isn't visually representing what's going on perfectly, but it's not going to be a perfectly smooth curve. There's going to be a little notchiness here. And the reason is because you've tried to eyeball it. You didn't tell Onshape that you want this to be tangent to this. But that is what we want. We want this curve to be tangent to this curve and this curve. Okay. Trouble is, remember what happened last time, is if we just click both of these and say, make it tangent. Let's watch. Let's see what happens. It might not be too bad. Let's watch. Well, that one actually went pretty well. So that's a bad example. Let's try this one. That one went pretty well too. Okay, sometimes when you do this, it'll move your other circles. We don't want it to move the other circles. So we're going to do what we did last time, which is to click both of these and fix them in place. So that now when I say I want a tangent, it has to move this line. It can't move either circle. So now we can click these two things and make them tangent. Okay, and now let's click these two things and make them tangent. Okay, so it moved my line around a little bit, and now because I used constraints, I know that this is a perfect curve transition, and stepping motors will perceive no notchiness in the motion around here, and there's no gaps. So, all right, so we've got a geometrically perfect curve going around here, up to here, around here, and then up here. All right. Okay, so the last curve we want to draw is the fork curve here. So we need a circle. This is pretty circular from here to here. I'm guessing if I try to eyeball the center point of that, I'm not going to do a good job. We can try it real quick. Let's do a center point circle. Okay, so again, I'm not going to start my circle here, but I do want it to be related to the center line. So I'm going to hover over this point so that Onshape will help me draw a circle based off of that center line. What do you think? Right about there maybe? Let's see how I did. Oh, so. Actually not too terrible, but not perfect. So why don't we go back and use, let's go back, undo. Let's use a 3-point circle here and do the same thing. So again, we want to use the 3 points. We don't want them to attach to anything. We just want to have it be like click, click, and click. That looks pretty good. For our purposes, we're going to delete these points now so they don't cause us trouble later. Okay, so now we've got a circle, but of course it's not based on the center here. So let's take the center of it, grab it, and drag it over a little bit. Now it guessed that I want to inference to the center line, but if it doesn't guess that, then you can touch the center line first and then drag up. So again, that's okay. Now, by the way, now that I've attached it to this, it's going to stay attached to that. So that inference is going to stay. Let's see. We hover over this. It says it's vertical. It's vertical relative to the center line. Okay, so that inference isn't going to go away now. If I try to change stuff about the circle, it's going to change it while preserving that constraint, which is what we want. So I can just kind of change the size to, let's, pretty close, right about there. How's that look? That'll work. Okay, so now we've got this inner line set as well. And bear in mind that one thing we're doing here is setting up all of our curves so that they are mirrorable. Whereas if we were doing splines, that would be more difficult. And the other thing that can happen with splines is you end up with knobbly curves. Because you're essentially drawing it by hand, it's not guaranteed that your curve is going to do a nice smooth sweep. And a lot of times you'll end up with something that just doesn't look good. Maybe it's like, it should be perfect, but as you look more carefully, it just doesn't look right. And the reason why is because it's just kind of a wandering line. It isn't quite mathematically pure. And that's why we draw circles and curves like this, so that when you're all done, it has a nice, clean, crisp, smooth look. It's very valuable for slingshot design. Okay, so let's get into the fork tips now. This will be more fun. One thing we can do, because we don't necessarily need all this other stuff hanging around, let's add a couple of points to the circle so that we can trim away what we don't need. Okay, so the trim tool, let's talk about that. The trim tool, let's just click on it here. Where did it go? It was, okay, so it's under the extend. Notice that when you select a different tool, it will leave that icon up. So if you go looking for the scissors, you're not going to find them. You have to go look for the extend tool, which is right here, and go back to trim. Trim is an interesting tool. So trim will delete out the part of a sketch entity that is between two other parts. Okay, so for example, this part of the circle can be defined between where it crosses the center line. Notice how it's not attached to the center line. It's just saying that this center line is an end point, and between there and there. Or if you don't like this line, it's between where it is tangent to the circle and where it crosses the center line. Now we actually don't need this line, so let's just click that and delete it out of there. We don't need this part of the circle. See how it's highlighting? Now I'm not clicking anything, I'm just hovering. See how it's highlighting what's between where it's tangent to here and tangent to there? Let's just delete that out of there. And then we might as well get this out of here while we're at it. Okay, but we still have all this extra circle hanging out here. And we want to trim it from here to about here. So how are we going to do that? Because there's nothing here defining the point where we want to break the circle. Well, luckily for us, there is a point tool. See this little circle? The humblest of the tools, but can be very powerful sometimes. So let's just pick where we want to break the circle, and maybe we'll do it at the bottom of the rectangle here or in there somewhere. Okay, we've added a point, right? So now when I go to use the trim tool, it's going to say, oh, how about between here and that point? Click the trim tool, highlight this, and sure enough, it will delete everything we don't need. Okay, we could do that to this circle too. We'll get to that later. So let's click out of the trim tool so we aren't haphazardly trimming things we don't want to trim. And let's start talking about building this fork tip. Okay, so the art of CAD is that there's no clear rules when you're drawing things of how to draw them. You've got to sort of learn your own approach. And my approach in this case is rather than try to trace around here, I'm going to break this shape down to a square and some circles, okay? Because I can draw that. So let's use a corner rectangle, remembering again that there are other kinds of rectangles. You could use a center point rectangle here, but what we're really trying to do is match outer contours, so the corner point rectangle is probably what we want. So now one thing to keep in mind is if you don't want to start the rectangle at the corner here because the corner is rounded over. You want to imagine where these things come together and click right about there. So I'm going to click once and see how the photo's skewed, but that's okay. I'm going to come down here. Now one thing I could do at this point is index off of this so that I'm perfectly horizontal to that. I don't actually want that because I'm following the drawing. And the other thing I don't want is to attach it to the circle. Maybe I do. Well, we'll do that later. Maybe I do want that. Problem is if you attach it to the circle, you're not going to have a nice tangent smooth line from the inner curve of the fork up to the side of the, so let's come back, let's do that later. We're just going to match the image for now. Click. Now again, it's asking you to put in values for this. You don't necessarily want to do that now because you eyeballed this. You don't want to give it specific values. So just hit the escape key or click out of the rectangle. Okay, so now within our rectangle here, oh, by the way, while we're doing this, if you click this and you want to know how long this line is, it's down here. It's 1.008 inches, which is pretty close to what we're doing because we wanted a 1-inch fork. That's how you measure things, by the way. So if I want to, okay, so I got that highlighted. I hit the space bar to unhighlight everything. If I want to know the radius of the circle, I just click on it and it tells me it's 2.429 inches. If I want more information, I can get it. This, by the way, while we're talking about it, is a super powerful tool. Say I want to know the distance between these two walls. Now, that's a bad example, but let's say I want to know the distance between the outer wall of this and the center line. That's a useful measurement for slingshots. Let's click this, and it's going to tell me 2.25 inches. Okay, pretty handy. How about if we want to know the total top to bottom of the slingshot right now? Let's hit the space bar. We'll go from the top of the fork to, I wonder if we can, okay, so we're going to click the circle. Now that's kind of a vague thing because where is it measuring from? Well, if we click down here, we can have, let's see, max distance in the Y, let's see, is it Z? I guess we're on the front plane, so it's going to be, you got to kind of get your head around this, but I think what we're talking is it's 6.35 inches should be top to bottom. So is that about right? That's about right for a slingshot, I guess. Anyway, this can take a little fiddling to figure out what X, Y, and Z mean in the context of your sketch, but all the information is there when you want to use it. And if you really just wanted to know the distance there, you could throw in a, well, let's throw in a point, actually. Let's throw in a point right. Okay, so I want to draw a point, and I want to draw it between these two entities. I'm going to come over until the line lights up. I'm actually going to light up both of them. There we go. And then I'm going to click the point, and it's going to be exactly at the intersection of those two things. So see, it got a little dancey in there, but you've got to kind of just fiddle with it until both things light up, and then it lets you do what you want. So there's the point. So now if we click out of the point tool, we can go from, well, we'll just do from this line to this point. And minimum distance, by the way, is that line. That isn't what you want. You want a strict distance in the XYZ plane, and that is going to be 6 point, oh yeah, see, that's nice. I haven't used this tool a whole lot. Hover over it and it shows you a line demonstrating exactly the distance that we're talking about. So it's a 6.35 inch long slingshot. Okay, and since we don't need that point, let's hit the space bar, unselect, so we're just selecting this point, hit the delete key and get it out of there. Okay, so back to our fork tip. So now we want to draw little circles that are presumably right in the middle of each of these lines. Well, how are we going to do that? Well, Onshape is pretty good at guessing what you're trying to do. So one thing we can do is, well, we could mark the centers first. Let's try that. Let's take our point tool and let's come along. Right now, okay, so it's highlighting this line. It's saying, do you want to be coincident to the line? And you're saying, yep, I'm trying to draw a point on this line. So that's cool. But what if you want to draw it in the middle of the line? Well, luckily for you, there's the center point constraint. And see the little box there? The little orange box came up that doesn't zoom, but that means that when you click right now, you're going to be putting a point not only on the line, but at the center point of the line. Cool, right? Because you have no idea how long this line is. I mean, we can look it up. But you don't have to measure it and cut that in half and figure out anything. Onshape will just give it to you. And it'll give it to you on this one too. So there we are, coming up here, and again, center point. And then we're going to leave this one for later to show another trick. So, cool, right? So now we've got, we know exactly where to start our circles from to be in the middle of that. So we don't want a 3-point circle anymore. Let's go back to a center point circle. And let's start the center point circle, and we're going to eyeball now. We just want it to be maybe about something like that, point 2, how's that sound? Okay, now this is a case where we want this circle and this circle to be the same. How are we going to do that? We have two ways. We can either just make a circle, eyeball it, and then copy that and drag it over, which is fine. Or we can choose a value that's easily repeatable. So right now the diameter is 0.204. You could remember that, or you could put in your own diameter and make it 0.2, and it will size it to that circle. So now that's a defined circle of 0.2 inches. So now we've got two options. We can either just draw another one and make it whatever size you want, doesn't matter, because you're going to put in the value of 0.2, and bam, it sizes it to that. So that's one way of doing it. But let's go back and do it another way. Say we don't have a nice, easy, tidy measurement, or it's a more complex shape and we need to copy it and paste it. So we're going to highlight this. Now, don't get disoriented by all these other things that light up. It's lighting up spaces, and that's okay. That's just something Onshape does for 3D design. But there's a difference between that kind of hazy light up and actually highlighting your sketch entity. See how it's like a bold orange versus a dull orange? Okay. So now this circle is highlighted. And again, if you're confused about multiple things being highlighted, hit the space bar and start over. We're going to click that circle. So you can right click and you can copy sketch entities. Okay. And now that you've copied a sketch entity, you can right click and paste a sketch entity. So let's talk about this transforming tool here. This is a very, very powerful tool. One thing to notice is that the little mouse icons there with the left button click lit up, that means that it won't accept your transform change until you hit the left mouse button in space. Okay, I'll show you what that means when we're done here. So let's look at this little thingy. This has the most important element of this is this circle. Okay, this circle tells where you're dragging this entity from, the sketch entity from. And because it's a circle, there's only one point. But we're going to do another example with a rectangle here in a second. So that's where you're dragging it from. This is just the general dragging tool. Click this and you can drag it around. I'll show you that. Whoops. Oh, I missed. Okay, so there you go. These arrows let you drag in an X or a Y dimension. So if you want to move it along a perfectly vertical or horizontal path, you can do that. You can also move it along a path and define how far. If you want to move it one inch up, you just move it that way a little bit, put in 1 inch, and now you've moved it exactly vertically 1 inch. Okay, but that's not what we want right now. Oh, it looks like okay. The other thing you can do here is rotate. So say you want this to be, now rotating a circle doesn't make any sense, but you want to rotate it 45 degrees, or you want to rotate it roughly 45 degrees and type in 45. Now it'll rotate it to 45 degrees. Okay. So let's left click and accept those changes. But actually, let's do a quick side note on the transform tool, which is a very important tool. So I've drawn a rectangle. I'm still in the rectangle tool, so it's asking me to define sides. I don't want to do that, so I'm going to click it again or hit escape. Now, the transform tool is right here, okay, next to the little picture insert we used before. So, transform. We're going to highlight this box, and now the transform thing pops up. So it is going to assume that I want to drag this box from this bottom left corner. But what if I don't? What if I want to drag it from this corner instead? What if what I'm trying to do is attach the corner of this rectangle to the center of that circle? Or maybe this corner of this rectangle to the center of that circle. The point is that whatever your intent is the intent is what you're going to use to decide which point you're going to use to drag from. Okay, so if that's your intent, then that's how you're going to decide where you're going to put this little circle. So let's just change it one more time and say we actually want this corner to be attached to the center of that circle. So, but first what we want to do is make this not a rectangle, but a diamond-ish. And we want it to be exactly 57 degrees, because for whatever reason. So, we got 57 degrees, we're dragging it from this corner, and now what I'm going to do is take our angled rectangle, which I am dragging from this point. I just want to emphasize that that's what's going on here. And I'm going to lock it on to the center of that circle. And now see the little mouse icon is there? You got to left click in order to accept your changes. So see everything I did in one step there? In other CAD programs, there's other ways of transforming things that are a little clumsier. But this is super powerful in one little tiny tool. So learning how to use the transform tool is extremely important and very powerful. So anyway, we don't want any of that. Oh, you know what? While we're doing this, why don't we talk about left versus right dragging? In most CAD systems, actually, if you drag from left to right, it is going to assume that you only want to highlight the things that are actually within your rectangle. So notice right now that I only have one entity that's actually fully within my rectangle, and it's the left wall of that rectangle. And sure enough, that's all that gets highlighted. But if I go from right to left, it's going to assume that anything touching my rectangle I want to have highlighted. So right now I've got the circle and 3 walls of that rectangle within my rectangle. It's going to highlight all of them. The only thing it's going to leave out is the thing that was not fully enclosed in my rectangle. Another super subtle but super powerful tool when you're trying to select certain things within your sketch environment. So tidbits everywhere. Okay, so let's delete this. And let's go back in, and you can sort of decide however you want to do this. We'll just do since we know the size, we'll just do a 0.2, and now we've got 2 circles there. Okay, so now we've got these drawn, but we've got to actually get them cut out of there. So let's go back to our trim tool and trim off the tops of the circles, and then trim this stuff out. And you can't trim points, so you have to delete points. Let's highlight those and get those out of there too. Keeping your sketches tidy is a difficult but important task. It's very easy to get dirty sketches where you keep using all these little guideline drawings, and then they just overlap, and there's all this extra stuff, and it causes mayhem. So tidying up after yourself as you go is a real virtue in CAD. One other thing I can mention as we go here is that if you do want lines that are just construction lines that you don't want to actually put into your sketch, you've got an option here, which is the construction tool. So say I wanted a center line through this rectangle, but if I actually draw a line, it's going to cause me trouble, because now I've got 2 separate spaces and things are going to interact with this line. I don't want it to be a real line. So what I'm going to do is click it and hit the construction toggle, and now it turns like this. Okay, so it still works like a sketch entity in here. Actually, this is mostly used when you go into 3D. This won't become part of your 3D model, so I'd have to think about whether it has a lot of function within the sketch environment, but it's something you can use down the road anyway. So let's delete that. By the way, I tagged the delete key to one of my mouse side buttons. That's a super useful little tip. Anyway, okay, so let's do sketch fillets. Sketch fillets can be a real headache until you figure out how to use them. And I'm going to show you why. So if we just click a corner, that's the sketch fillet tool. If we click a corner, it's like, how does a 0.25 inch sound? You say, you know, I don't really want that. I really want 0.1 inch. Look what it's going to do. It's going to move everything to match the fillet. What a headache, right? So there's 2 ways to solve this problem. The one way, which you can use when you need more precise control, is to lock, or fix, I should say, both things that you're going to fillet. So let's fix those. And then let's go back in and do a sketch fillet. And it says 0.1, but we actually want it to be 0.25. It'll change it without changing the sidelines. Okay. Now say you want to change it one more time. You didn't really like that. Click out of the sketch fillet tool, double click this number, and then say, you know what, 0.08 is about right. And it's not going to mess with anything else in your sketch. It's just going to keep changing the fillet. Okay, so that's a bit cumbersome, but it's a powerful way to handle sketch fillets when you need to do that. But let's back out of all of this and go back to our regular, nice, innocent blue lines and say that we just want to eyeball this fillet. And we'll be happy enough with that, which is what we're going to do here. You're going to click and hold with the left mouse button. Don't let it up. And you can do a dynamic sketch fillet. And you can bring it to right about, how's that look? Okay, 0.132801 inches, perfect, exactly what I had in mind. Hit the return key, the enter key. Okay, now Onshape says, okay, we're going to do sketch fillets with that exact value, because that's your default sketch fillet value now. So if we come around here and click it, it's going to give us the same thing. And we can get one here as well. All right, cool. So that's really helpful until we want to do a sketch fillet here. Now that's annoying because we just want a little itty-bitty one, and that's going to look stupid. Well, it's not the worst thing in the world, but let's say we want to have a different sketch fillet there. So let's go back into the sketch fillet tool, and let's try to dynamically size this one. You know, it's such an odd geometry that it doesn't really like it. It's not updating well. It's confused about where my mouse is going. That's just a difficult fillet to do. So scratch that. Let's undo that. And in this case, we're going to use the other technique where we fix both of these things, and we go in and just decide exactly what sketch fillet size we want. So that's way too much. So let's try about 0.05. Yeah, that's about right. So now our default sketch fillet is 0.05. So we can go through and click away and know that all these other ones are going to be just how we wanted them. So, okay, so let's get out of that. Now, notice that we forgot to do this one. Problem is, we no longer have the same center line we started with because we've added fillets now. So now the center of this line is not going to be right over from this. So we're going to use the skills we've learned so far, and we're going to use inferences based off of other entities. So we got a point tool, right? We want the point to be perfectly horizontal from here. So we're going to wake that up. We're going to come on over, and Onshape is like, yep, I've got you. You know we want to be horizontal to that line. And then we've got you here too. So we have two little constraints lighting up, horizontal from that dot and coincident with this line. So when you see those, you always want to take a pause and say, do I actually want these constraints? And it looks like you do, so go ahead and click. And now you got a point which is perfectly perpendicular to that. Cool. So now we know the size of this circle, so let's go back and draw this again. And we can make it whatever size we want because we're going to define it with the keyboard, 0.2. And then let's go in and trim some stuff out. Now see how the trim tool is now crossing the circle, so it takes a few extra clicks. But that's okay. So let's click these away. And then now we don't need that point anymore, so let's go ahead and delete it just to stay tidy. Now our last sketch fillet was these corners, so we should be good to go to just keep these at the same value, and we are. So good stuff. All right, so there you go. Now you got your fork tips. Okay, so now let's connect the fork tip to the inner fork here. So what we need is a curve that's going to be tangent to this circle and tangent to this line. Okay, so let's just demonstrate 3-point arc here. If we do a line from, okay, so notice I was about to draw a line that was going to lock to the center point of this line, but I don't actually want that because that's going to force it to sit there. But I want a line that can slide up and down in order to find the tangent point of this line. So stay away from, always watch your constraints as they're forming. And we're going to put one here, and then we're going to eyeball it so it's about right. Okay, so let's try this. My guess is that when we try to put tangent constraints between this and this and this and this, it's going to wreak havoc. But let's try it. This and this line. Let's try to make them tangent. Are you not going to do it for me? Oh, there we go. Okay, so it doesn't look like it changed anything there, but I never trust it. Okay, let's look one more time. It looks like it left my vertical line alone, which may be because this vertical line is in so many relationships with other things that Onshape said, forget it, don't try to move that one, just move this line, it's much easier. So I think that's what happened, but I don't entirely trust it, because sometimes little changes can happen at such a small level that you don't quite notice them. So let's just fix that. And while we're at it, since we know what we're going to do, let's fix this too. And now let's put in some tangent constraints between this line and this line. Okay, and this line, this curve, and this circle. Let's see if this works. Ooh, it didn't like that. So in order to make this line tangent to the circle, it has to bring it all the way over here. So let's go back and see, what if we do, what do we have here? Okay, so we want both things fixed. Why don't we establish this tangency first? See what happens. Oh, it still doesn't like that. Okay. So it may be that this is just a bad curve. So let's delete that. And let's try again. Maybe if we bring it from a little bit higher up, it'll work for us. Straighten it out a little bit. Something like that. Okay, let's try this. Now you're just watching me fiddling, but fiddling is a big part of CAD sometimes, trying to get things to work. Okay, so now I like that one. I don't think it's going to like this one. Hang on. Quiet, calm down. You got a lot of things here. Click that. Let's try to make you tangent to that. Okay, so it could actually handle that. Now it's bringing it, there's no flat spot here, but I'm okay with that. As long as it's tangent, it's much more important to me to have smooth curve transitions than it is to have this be perfectly vertical for a second. So I'm okay with that curve. Now you can keep fiddling with it if you want. You saw what I did here in order to make that happen. So let's go in now and start. We don't need this line anymore, and we actually don't need the rest of the circle. Now when I highlight the circle, it's going to go from the point here to the point where it crosses the center line. See that? And we don't need any of that, so we're going to delete all that out. Okay, what do we have left now? We need to do this stuff in here. So let's draw a circle. I'm going to do a center point circle because I'm just kind of eyeballing this one. You can do an ellipse if you wanted, I guess, but I'll let you figure that out on your own. Okay, so let's just do a circle. Alright, so we've got that circle, and we want a line that comes over to here. I actually don't even like the way this comes in all that much. So, but we'll just accept it for now. Well, let's let's put another curve in there. So we'll put a point there, and we're going to delete this out. And let's do another curve that goes from here, kind of, we're going to have to do it like that a little bit. Okay, now this line is fixed, and so I'm going to make sure these two things are tangent, and it's not going to move this one. Tangent, good, yeah, that looks a little better. Okay, so now we just need a line that goes from the bottom of this circle over to here. What do you think? One straight curve will do? I think we could probably get away with that. We might need to have one curve that comes over and then another circle here. That's probably more like what we're going to need. So let's try something like this. We want to eyeball it so it's going to be about tangent to the bottom of this circle. Okay. And why don't we go ahead and fix that right away. Let's fix, well, that's not that important a circle right now, but we can still make you guys tangent. Okay, there we go. And then let's draw another circle that's kind of fill in here. Oops. Okay, wait, circle. What do you think? Something like that. It's going to touch them both. Maybe we won't have it touch anything right at first. We get it about the right size. Click out of the tool, grab it by the center, and then just start kind of pulling it around till it's pretty close. Okay, I like that. Now, what should we move to what? Why don't we fix the circle here, and then we can drag this line down to become tangent with that. Good, and we can drag this line up to be tangent with that. There we go. Now we've got an extra bit here, and so we want to cut that out because we don't like any excess pieces in our drawings. You know what, actually this is an interesting thing to notice. So we mathematically define these as tangent, but the computer is going to show me these lines as not tangent, right? Now that's a graphics card issue, and I'm saying graphics card, I don't really know enough computer stuff to say if that's accurate or not, but whatever it is, that isn't really what's going on. And one way you can show this and kind of force it to update is by trimming off excess pieces like this. See how then it updated, and now it's still not perfect, but it's closer. Okay, it's showing you pretty much what's going on. And again, if you're ever confused, if you see something like that and don't like it, always rely on your constraints. So we hover over the line, we got two tangent constraints. One of them is with that circle, and the other one is with something down off the screen we can't see. Anyway, so now we've got a nice curve that comes around, perfectly tangent there, and around. Okay, pure geometry is what we want all the time. So let's trim that out. And then how are we going to connect this to this? Well, I say we draw another circle. Let's eyeball it to be about that big. And we're going to go through the same process here. We'll drag it over so it's pretty close. Okay, good. I'm going to fix this so it can't move on me. We're going to click these two entities, and make those tangent. We're going to click, okay, good, right? And we're going to click these two entities and make them tangent. Okay, good. So now we've got all these pretty curves now. So let's start cutting out stuff we don't need. What don't we need, by the way? We don't need, what am I doing here? Okay, so we wanted to come around and go there. So I don't think we need this, don't need this, don't need this, or this, or this, or this. Okay, good. All right. See how I did that? It's just all lines and curves and circles that all very clearly define relationships to one another. So there's no notches, there's no gaps, there's no nothing. This is how you get gap-free, notch-free drawings, is by making sure that you're controlling everything as you go along. So that fork tip looks fine to me. All of these lines look fine to me. We're still on the trim tool, so let's trim this out. We don't need that. We want to make sure there's nothing on the other side. Okay, let's take a look at it without this drawing in back. So can we do it here? See these little eyeballs that pop up? If you don't want to see a sketch, you can just make it go away like that. There's a few ways to do this. So let's accept our sketch here. Remembering that once we accept, we can't go back anymore. So make sure we like everything we have in here before we do that. So let's accept that. And then, so there's a couple options here. If you don't want this at all anymore, you can highlight it and delete it. But we may want it again. So we can make it go away like that. If you want to suppress it, you can also do that. You can suppress it so that it can't interact with anything in the rest of your sketch anymore. Now that's something that will be more useful to you later on when you get more layered designs, but it's just something to keep in mind. So anyway, for right now, we can also take away our current sketch. We can see and not see whatever we want. But here we go. There's the sketch we've got. Looks fine to me. Remembering that now if we try to interact with it, nothing. It looks like it's interacting with us, but it's not because we're not in the sketch. So again, don't get confused by that. So let's go back into whatever this stands for. Okay, let's talk about the mirror tool. So the mirror tool is here. The mirror tool prefers that you select a mirror line first. Select the line to mirror about. Okay, you don't have to do it that way. If you give it some entities that obviously are not a mirror line, then it will say, okay, now select your mirror line. So let's do it both ways just for fun. So if we highlight all this stuff, okay, now remember I've done a left to right box, which means that this wasn't fully enclosed, so it didn't include it. So let's try that again, right to left. This is a case where you might want to use that. You don't want your center line mirrored because you don't want multiple center lines, speaking of clean design. But you want everything else. So let's go right to left. And now anything touching the box will be included. See that? All right, so let's see what happens now. If you click the mirror line, now it says select a mirror line. It says, okay, none of those things look like a mirror line. Let's select a mirror line. You click this, it'll mirror everything over nice for you. Okay. The other way to do it, and the more orthodox, Onshape way to do it, is to click the tool, select the mirror line, and now you can go in and highlight everything. I think the reason why I like to do it the other way is sometimes it's hard to highlight everything correctly. And so if you've selected a mirror line and then you highlight incorrectly, now you got to go in and clean up your work. Whereas if you get the highlight right first and then click mirror, it just saves you some steps potentially. But you can see how that works. So there we go. So you're still in the tool, so make sure you click out of the tool before you start mirroring other random things. And there you go. You've got a slingshot. Okay, so let's talk about what else haven't we covered here. You'll learn more about these constraints as you go. You get the idea, so you can, as you find situations in your drawings where you want things to be equal or perpendicular or parallel, you know, normal to a curve, that kind of thing. You can use these as you go, and it's good to keep thinking about them because they're very powerful. Let's see, what else did we not use? We learned how to use dimension, insert an image. We learned the transform tool, the mirror tool. We didn't learn the offset tool. Let's do an offset real quick. So there's two ways to do an offset. You can click one entity, and it'll give you this little slider. You can decide which side you want to be on. And then say you want it to be about 2 inches. You can go to here. You can left click, and then you say, let's do 2 inches. And it'll bring it down to 2 inches. Okay. But let's say we want to actually make an outline of the entire slingshot. You can click and drag, and anything that's tangent to that line will come out with you. Now this is an interesting test, because say that you made a mistake somewhere, and somewhere in there you forgot to do a tangent, or you did a tangent wrong, or something else went goofy. This won't give you a smooth line all the way around. Okay, and if something's broken, it kind of highlights what's broken and lets you go in and you know, fix there instead of just looking hopelessly around trying to find, you know, of your million little connections in there what's broken. So that's a tool you can use for that and just as a general outline. So one other thing to notice here is that both of these things are gray, so you know that you do not have a broken sketch. There's no gaps. It will not turn gray if there's any gaps at all. If it's not gray, then you've got the headache of going in and trying to find what you did wrong, and the best way to avoid having that happen is to make sure you design things robustly as you go along. So, okay, so that's that tool. We talked about these. Splitting is good. If you have a circle, you need to break into 2 points. We talked about sketch fillets, construction. We don't need that. You can put text in, dots, splines, polygons. If you decide you want to have polygons, you can play with this tool. It's pretty self-explanatory. We talked about curves, circles, squares, lines, and this is for 3D stuff. So, okay, now you've got this beautiful sketch. Now you want to share it with people. Your friend says, hey, I like that design you made. Can you send me the DXF so I can get a water jet cut? You say, no problem. Let me make sure that it all looks good. We have all nice rounded edges. WaterJet does not like sharp edges, and it doesn't like radiuses less than about 0.017 inches. So this looks like a pretty legit design. Let's right-click on the sketch and export as DXF DWG. Okay, and this will allow you to save it with whatever version you want. Now, I'm no pro at figuring out what these versions are, but you can choose DXF or DWG. Whatever release you want. Sometimes people are using older software, and you need to go back, if they can't open it, you may want to go back to one of these other versions. Options download, looks like you got a few options there you can play with, export. So that's how you make that happen. Let's see, what else do you need to know? Oh, here's an important one. Say you want to share this with me or with anyone else. You can click the share button and you can select, okay, so this is a private document. If it's a public document, as it will be with a free account, then all someone else needs is the name of the document. Not the sketch, but the document, and they can look it up. Excuse me. But if you want to send it to someone specifically, you can type in a friend or an email, and then they will get a link. And that's actually a little easier because now I can just go back to the shared with me documents, and and it'll pop up instead of me having to type in and find it. So, okay, so there you go. That is pretty much everything you need to know about sketching. If we want to get into 3D work later, we can, but for now, I think this will do it. If you have any questions, let me know, and we can talk about it more later. All right, bye-bye.